Hello and welcome back to Own Guard Solutions. To continue our series on field stripping and cleaning a firearm, I have chosen my personal daily carry, my H&K VP9 9mm. I love this thing, but I'm not going to blather on about the VP9. You came here to see me tear it down and to clean it, and that's what we're going to do. So stick around, we'll get started. So here we are back with my HK VP9 9mm. This is one of my preferred daily carries in my EDC rotation. It just so happens to be my primary right now. Who knows when I'll switch it out again. I love this thing, super accurate. I remember the first time I shot it, shortly after the VP9s came out, a buddy of mine had one at the range and was shooting one day, and he let me shoot it. And the first time I ever picked the thing up, excuse me, the first time I ever picked the thing up, I was actually able to keyhole with it, and I love it. So this 9mm will not do you wrong. Of course, I have it outfitted with a Holosun HE508T green red dot. And I actually have a Streamlight TLR 7A mounted to it for the lighting, and I just love this setup. I'm carrying it in a Tier 1 concealed holster and love the whole thing. So with that, let's get started. Let's talk about how to break this thing down. So like many of the striker fires, it's similar in breakdown. Oh, and I might also add, even though HKs put a lot of the paddle magazine release on it, which is ambidextrous on either side, usually ambidextrous on either side of the back of the trigger guard, I opted for the push button because most every, or pretty much every other pistol I own, especially those that I carry, have a push magazine release, and I didn't want to have to learn a new mechanism just for this one firearm. And that's something to keep in mind too, is like I mentioned in other videos that you might want to go back and watch, talking about the Holosun, I opted to go the 508 route for any of my carries, just so I didn't have to relearn my sights. And it's bad enough you have to kind of get used to iron sights across firearms, but iron sights are iron sights to a large degree. Red dots vary some, and so I wanted to be consistent there. But the mag release is another one of those items that I didn't want to have to relearn, and then based on what I'm carrying, figure out what I'm carrying and adjust for it. So I opted for the push button. So now I'll shut up about that. So to break down this thing, it's similar to other striker fires, as I mentioned. The first thing that we want to do is make sure this firearm is unloaded, and so it already has the magazine removed. I'm just going to rack the slide a few times here. I'm going to open it up. Hopefully you can see down in there that, of course, the chamber is indeed empty. There's nothing in here, so we can confirm this firearm is indeed empty and safe to work on. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record before it's over with. I'm okay with that. When I'm working on my firearms or cleaning my firearms, I don't even have ammo or even magazines in the same room. So there's no ammo in this room whatsoever while I work on this thing. So finally get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab hold of the slide and push it rearward and lock it back. That's the first thing I've got to do. And then this is the disassembly lever here, lever if you prefer. And it's aimed backwards. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab it. The second thing I'm going to do is grab it and move it down clockwise until it's facing almost 6 o'clock. Not quite, maybe a little forward of that. And then I'm going to take my slide and I'm going to push back on it slightly. You hear that click. And then I'm going to bring it forward. And there's a little bit of stick there you may have seen when the slide was about here, but that's okay, just bring it forward. You don't have to pull the trigger, it doesn't have to be rearward, but you do have to lock the slide back as the first step before you move the lever down so you can take the slide away from the frame. And you can see this thing is fairly dirty, really dirty. I've gotten Suffice it to say, several hundred rounds through this thing now since its last bath, maybe even pushing 1,000 rounds. So could it keep going? I have no doubt that this firearm, like many modern day firearms, could, but I figured since we're doing these videos, now is as good a time as any to clean them. You can see inside the slide, it's fairly filthy as well. So today's a good time to clean this for everyone. And so with that, we're going to keep going. So the next thing I'm going to do is remove the guide rod with recoil spring. And like just about any other, I'm going to push it forward ever so slightly to get it out of place. I'm going to lift up the tail end and then I'm going to pull it out. That's that. I'm going to set it aside, and then like most other barrels of these semi-automatics, I'm going to lift up slightly and pull it out. And you can just see it's, again, I've seen dirtier, and I'm sure there's people carrying dirtier firearms than this one, but it's dirty enough for me. It's a good day for cleaning. And you can just see the amount of gunk all in this thing. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to pull out my trusty frog lube solvent. The bottle's huge because I use a lot of this stuff. I'm going to put things aside here so I can spray them. I'm going to go ahead and spray down the barrel a little bit here. I need to adjust that a bit. Get that going. And then I'm going to spray the frame. I don't like to douse things, but I know I need to get this stuff broken up. And then lastly, I'm going to do the slide. And it's okay if it drains all over everything. That's okay. We need to get it clean, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to let this sit a few minutes, and I'm going to brush it. I've got my trusty nylon brush here. I'm just going to, after I give it a little bit, I'm just going to do this a minute here real quick. I'm just going to take this brush and start scrubbing and give it a good cleaning. But I'm going to let this sit. And so while this sits and I scrub, I'll cut away. And when we come back, we'll go through the next steps in the process. Stick around. All right, we're back. So we've gotten everything cleaned off about as well as we can with the solvent, Q-tips, brushes, our famous dirty cloth, which works fantastic after it's broken in. The next phase using frog lube, and you don't have to do this, but it is, I believe, safe to say, a recommended phase of frog lube application is they make a paste. It's basically a CLP for all intent and purposes. And they recommend that you heat up the metal surfaces before you paint it on. And that sounds weird. It's not usual necessarily to use a heat gun with when you're cleaning your firearms, but I think the frog lube makes it worthwhile, and I don't know that it takes any longer. It is a different step. It is an extra step, it seems like, but what we're doing is we're heating up the metal so that the paste can melt. That does a couple of things meaningful to us, because when it melts, it's easier to apply, and we'll use a cheap model brush to apply it with, and you'll see it just goes on like literally melted butter. And the other reason why we heat up the metal is because, as we know, metal expands when it gets a little heat on it. And the idea is that that helps, especially with the paste being melted as well as it does. That just helps that paste really seep into those metal pores and let that metal get in there, all for getting a better coat of protectant onto the metal. So I'm going to start out here. I've decided, instead of doing the inside of the frame first, I will say that since this is polymer can take some heat, but I wouldn't want to sit here with a heat gun on high and just hold it over the polymer. So when we do the frame, it's important that you're constant, and you should be doing this anyway, if nothing else, to avoid burning yourself, but you should be constantly moving the heat gun across just the metal pieces. And you know, some heat's going to transfer to where it needs to go. Like there'll be some even get here on the disconnect lever, but we want to just keep that heat gun moving. And even when we're dealing with more solid pieces like slides, you'll see that I still keep that heat gun in motion. And I'm going to take my rag and put it between me and the metal, because the outside of that slide is, if it's not obvious, it's going to get hot too. And again, for this heat gun, I just got this cheap Wagner, my trusty Wagner heat gun. I'm going to turn it on high since with the slide I'm dealing mostly with metal. And hopefully you can hear me. Well, that's not, yep, that's high for this one. So it's still manageable. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to wave this heat gun over the inside. We're going to start with the inside of the slide first. I'll move to the outside next. The same with the frame. And I'm not going to show you the whole process, but I did want to show you using the heat gun. It doesn't hurt a thing as long as you're not holding it over plastic and rubber, stuff like that. You just want to move it around for several seconds, let that metal surface heat up, which is what I'm doing now. Get up in there. Well, that's warm on my wrist for sure. All right, that's probably good enough. You want to be careful where you sit your heat gun back down. For me, I'm setting it on my stone mantle, or not my mantle, sorry, my hearth. And all I'm doing is getting some paste. Here, let me move this down. Getting some paste on my brush to then start painting on the metal that we just heated up. And hopefully, as you can see, I'm using that towel in the way because that metal's still hot. Hopefully you can just see how quickly and easily that paste just melts. Almost, I mean, it's right, immediate on contact. Almost immediately on contact. And so if I need a little bit more, that's okay. And what you're going to do is we're going to do, and I'm not going to keep you on for this, cut back later when I'm done, but we're going to paint the inside of, I say painting, but you know what I mean. We're going to coat the inside of the slide, the outside of the slide, the outside of the barrel, because that's the nice thing about using the frog lube, liquid frog lube on the inside of the barrel. It basically has a nice, very light coat of CLP protectant in there now, using that. And this is just setting us up for the rest of the metal surfaces. So I'm going to paint this. The goal is to let this dry to a haze. And it can take different amount of time depending on the humidity in your house and the temperature, all the usual things like that. But we're going to let this dry to a dull haze. The drier the better before we wipe it off. And then once we get it all painted, it's all had time to dry and set up a little bit. We're going to wipe it off, and that's really going to seal up the metal. The frog lube just does a great job with sealing up. I don't know the chemical name for that, so bear with me, but it just does a fantastic job of getting that metal sealed up. And you know, I gotta think that that's where all the protection comes from. So stick around. We're going to finish up with the outside of the slide, heat it up next. Do the same for the inside of the frame, the metal parts inside the frame, the barrel. Get a little bit on around our recoil spring and guide rod, and we'll come back in a little bit. So stick around. All right, we're back. So where we left off, I'd sprayed some frog lube solvent onto the inside of the frame and mostly the inside of the slide as well. And hopefully you can see here, I got some decent light today. Hopefully you can see just how clean by comparison it is now. And all I did was, well, I did a couple of things. I used my trusty blue nylon bristled brush, and you can see that new one's already gotten pretty dirty just after doing this firearm. But you can tell the difference. And just getting down in there and getting all that gunk out. And the same with the slide too. If you remember what the slide looked like a minute ago, it is really clean. And I thought that I would mention a couple of things. So if you look down into the frame, you can just tell, hopefully maybe the light and the angles here, you can just tell there's all sorts of nooks and crannies, hiding places for lead and gunpowder and carbon, all up in here, down in here, all over. And so just everyone develops their own way of cleaning, and we've got to get in those nooks and crannies. Sometimes you don't do them every single time you clean. You know, when we do a basic filled strip, we're not looking to take apart completely the frame, and if you don't know what you're doing, leave that to a knowledgeable gunsmith. So we're not looking to tear things down any further, but when we do have the slide off the frame, we want to get as much crud out of there as possible. So what I like to do is take a Q-tip, get into these nooks and crannies where I wouldn't be able to get my rag in there, certainly. And then the VP9's just got some nasty hiding places down in here. I mean, you know, a lot of pistols do have some interesting hiding places for dirt and grime. But the Q-tip really, and you can see I still got stuff coming off because it's hard to get all the way down in here unless you are completely disassembling the firearm, which you don't want to have to do every single time you clean. But where we can, we want to be sure to get back in behind these places that we know there are, like the VP9, and give it a once over. And so a Q-tip's just a quick and easy way to do that. And in this particular weapon, coming in from the front here, getting in behind these points is pretty easy to do and allows you to access all of that stuff for the most part, even though you don't have it out of the frame itself, the polymer bit of the frame itself. You can get in there and you can see I'm still getting some stuff off of the Q-tip. That's okay. I mean, again, without breaking it all the way down and just really getting after it. This is going to leave it cleaner than what it was when you started, and believe me, it's only going to appreciate, you know, anytime you clean your firearm, you're help keeping it safe and you're helping keeping it perform at its peak. So the best you can clean it is still better than the way you started with it, right? But I'm just showing you that, you know, for some of these nooks and crannies in the VP9 especially, and certainly some other firearms, a Q-tip can be your friend. And then for inside the slide, again, we don't want to soak our firing pin area too much, but you know, we know that solvent's going to get in there. So what I like to do is either with my pointy instrument, my punch, my brass punch, and my rag, you know, sometimes I'll take my rag and put it over the tip and then use that to get into some of those tougher places. But even that gets to be too thick and built up, even on the point, to get down into some of the places, which is why I like the Q-tip, because especially for like around the firing pin, I can do a pretty good job, again, without completely disassembling this, I can do a pretty good job of getting down into some of these holes and crannies with a Q-tip. So if you don't have any Q-tips, I recommend adding them to your cleaning lineup. So I'm going to set both the frame and the slide aside for just a minute and talk about the barrel. So again, we've talked about this a little bit before. It doesn't really matter where you start. You're going to start with solvent to clean off the bulk of the junk. It's okay if you want to go ahead and clean off the outside of your barrel, but eventually you're going to have to do the inside. And I don't know how well you can see, but this barrel is in good shape, but it's pretty dirty down in there. And so what I'm going to do, what I like to do, is take my bore snake, and right where the brushes are embedded in the rope, as I call it, I take a little bit of frog lube and just dabble it on there, and inevitably I get it all over the place, but that's okay. And what we're going to do is we always want to start from the chamber end, so we just get in the habit of avoiding the mouth of the muzzle, the crown as they call it. If this exit point, this rim, this edge of where the last point the bullet touches, if that crown gets banged up, sorry, let me hold it over here where you can see it better. If this crown gets banged up or burred up or scratched up, it can affect accuracy. Now you got to beat it up pretty good and be using steel and whatnot, steel on steel instead of your brass or whatnot. But the idea with all firearms, whether we're talking pistols or rifles, is to avoid going through this end, the muzzle end of the barrel, when we can. And there's instances where we can't, but where we can, we want to try to go in through the chamber. Plus, bullets are traveling in that one direction anyway, so this just sets us up better overall. And once you do it, you get used to it, and it's not a big deal. But I'm feeding my bore snake through, and then probably this one I'm going to feed it through at least 10 times. Just because it is a little nasty, as you saw, or hopefully maybe saw. Doing all this in a confined space here for you, so bear with me. Just going to keep feeding it through from the chamber side out and letting that thing do its work. If you are still using rods, You know, they work fine too. Rods and jags and your patches and whatnot work good. But I'm telling you, man, once you try out the bore snake, you'll wish you'd done it long before now if you haven't already. Hopefully you have, but if not, and again, we have no affiliation. We don't get paid to say what we say or talk about what we talk about, but I'm just telling you my personal experience with the bore snake. You can't go wrong, and it does a superb job in cleaning the inside of your barrels. I don't know how many times that is. I feel like it's 6 or 7. Let's take a look, see if we can tell. Oh yeah, I don't know if you can see that, but we're getting good. We're close to having this a wrap. But I wanted to come on here real quick and show you how I clean this barrel, and it's pretty much the same for all barrels. Just take a few minutes to punch this bore several times. Usually 10 times will get it. Sometimes you only got to do it a few times. If your firearm's not super dirty, the bore snake does a wonderful job cleaning. I'll shut up about that now. But I did want to point out that there's a perfectly good use for Q-tips in gun cleaning, and hopefully showing you these. The VP9 just had a few nooks and crannies that made that a perfect time to talk about Q-tip usage. So I think we've got this barrel pretty well cleaned off. Give it a good wipe, take a look down in there. Oh yeah, yeah, that's, I don't know how well you can see that, kind of hard to see, but take my word, it is clean and way cleaner than it was when we started. Okay, so the next phase of this process, which we'll go to next, is getting all the metal pieces coated up well with the frog lube paste. And so I'm going to cut away and we'll get started with that next. So stay tuned. And we're back one more time. We have, since the last time, we took our infamous little inexpensive heat gun and applied some heat to the different parts, the slide, the innards of the frame, the barrel. Didn't do the recoil spring, although we did get some CLP onto the spring and the guide rod. And we heated up the metal and used the frog lube paste, painted it on, and hopefully in the previous segment you saw how immediately that paste melted. And the idea again is speed of application, with it being super easy to apply with the little cheap model brush we're using. And then the main reason is protection. And the idea again, to reiterate, is that with heat, metal expands, therefore its pores open up, even if it's ever so slightly with a little bit of warmth. And that just allows that paste, when it melts, to be drawn into that metal that much more, providing you know, theoretically that much better protection than if you just applied it to the cold surface. So that's kind of it. As I mentioned also in the previous segment, and hopefully you can see here in the light, it's not so shiny and wet looking anymore. It's begun to dry. It's really drying pretty well. Oops. Inside and out of the frame here, as an example, you can see kind of how it's getting the dull haze I mentioned. And if you heard me, I mentioned it a million times in my previous video, one of my previous videos I did, I think with my 10mm. It's like car waxing. And if you're familiar with car waxing, hopefully you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If not, don't worry about it. You can see that we've got a nice dry haze. With as much as I've applied, it probably would take even more time to get completely dried to that nice haze we like to see when we are waxing our car. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to begin wiping it off. And so we'll start here with the frame. Let me move the side and other pieces aside. Kind of start here with the frame, and you know, again, not to tout the frog lube too much more than what I already have, because I'm sure you're tired of hearing about it by now, especially if you watch the other videos. But the nice thing about that is that it's non-toxic, so you don't have to worry about it stinking up your workspace. Your significant other is less likely to kick you outside. Frog lube is biodegradable, non-toxic. You can actually eat the stuff. I wouldn't recommend it, especially after you've been dipping a dirty paintbrush down into it, for example, to apply it. But it's good stuff, and You don't have to worry about it causing damage to plastics or rubbers if you come across any of that, which you will obviously with a polymer pistol, right? You don't have to worry about applying the frog lube. You have to worry about the heat gun. And again, that's why I told you to keep the heat gun moving and don't just hold it in one spot and don't hold it super close. And that holds true whether you're trying to heat up the piece of metal or working around you know, a piece of plastic or rubber on your gun or the polymer frame in this example. Just want to keep that moving. But now we're going to wipe it all off. And, you know, again, the idea being is that what's left behind is, because of the heat and because of the paste seeping into the metal, you're left with a better or a pretty darn good, either way, coating of protection for your metal pieces. I'm just going to wipe up in here. I know there's no frog lube in the mag well, but I'm still going to get up in there, make sure I got it all. Any brush marks, whatnot. One thing that I wanted to mention, a couple of things that I wanted to mention here, just as good a time as any, is again, the disassembly lever is down when we you know, it needs to be down like this in order to take the slide off. When you're cleaning, I'm going to show you now, it might get knocked back up into place. It's just important you remember to push it back down, otherwise you're not going to get the slide back on. But the other thing I wanted to show you is when it's down, one side of that disassembly plate's facing up, which makes it easy to clean. But in order to get the other side, you need to return it home just long enough for you to clean that off and wipe off whatever might be on there. So just wanted to point that out with you too. I mentioned this in the previous segment, but you know, I'm sort of anal when it comes to safety tips, usually anyway, is when you're handling that heat gun, just don't be careless about, you know, after you've used it and heated up a part, don't be careless about where you lay it down. If you've got children around, be cognizant of that. Make sure to keep them away and out of the area. The end of that heat gun is extremely hot, as I'm sure you can figure out for yourself. But you know, you don't want to set it down on these neoprene mats, whatever rubber mats, whatever they're made out of. You wouldn't want to get the end of it at least touched to your wooden furniture very long. I'm sure your SO would not appreciate that. And you definitely don't want to get real sloppy and forget and set it down in your lap until you're ready to move on to the next part. So just some things. I happen to be sitting in front of my fireplace, as I'm sure you've noticed earlier in the video, and I have my hearth that I could easily lay it on the stone and not have to worry about it. I just want to be sure not to touch that hot end or let it get up against anything. And the other safety tip that's not immediately apparent, but I wanted to go ahead and talk about it, and I'm surprised I haven't before now in the other videos, is whether you're at the range shooting or you're cleaning up your firearm, you know, unless you're wearing rubber gloves, which I do some of the time and others don't. That's just me being sloppy about wearing nitrile gloves or whatever, latex, whatever you're not allergic to. You want to be sure when you wash your hands, and again, it's true whether or not you've been shooting at the range or you're cleaning up your firearms. You got a lot of lead, or at least some lead. You got some gunpowder in here. All of that stuff is not healthy, and you don't want to get that on you when you go to the bathroom, just keeping it real. And you don't want to be scratching your eyes and digging in your nose and eating with your dirty hands. So you want to wash your hands. And I usually like to alternate between my hand soap and some dish soap just to cut the oils and greases and CLPs off my hand. But the one bit of advice I'll give you about washing hands, and you probably already know this, is when you've been handling a gun and you got all this good stuff on your hands, you want to use cold water only. Like we talked about with metal, heat opens up your pores also. And so when you use hot or warm water on your hands to wash off all the stuff that the dirt that guns make, that just potentially allows those nasty things to seep into your pores even easier. And so you always want to wash your hands after handling firearms of any sort for any reason with cold water. So I'll give you that pointer for free if you didn't already know. If you did know and I'm telling you something you already know, you can ignore it. So I think we've gotten the frame about as wiped down as we're going to. Let's move on. I'm going to do, even though I didn't heat it up and go through all that hassle, I certainly don't want to make the recoil spring and the guide rod inside of the spring. In this case, the spring isn't really meant to taken off of this for regular cleaning. And I can't tell you, maybe somebody can in the comments, it looks like there might be a way to take this end cap off the guide rod. I guess it makes sense because if the recoil spring broke, you'd need a way to replace it. I'm not sure if this is an entire one-piece housing. You know, obviously it's got separate spring to it. I'm not saying it's part of the guide rod, but I'm not certain if that's meant to be taken off or if this is all meant to be treated as one piece. I have not investigated that, so if you know, feel free to leave us a comment. We're learning stuff every day. Always. I love learning. But anyway, my original point is you don't really want to soak the guide rod. If you're not taking the spring off, it makes it very difficult to clean the guide rod off itself, but you just want to do as best you can. And if no one tells me, I'm going to investigate to see if this can't come off. It might can. Anyway, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But I am going to wipe off a little bit. I actually painted on a little bit of paste while the brush is warm. It makes it so much easier, a little bit easier to get on there. Probably want to get down to that guide rod at some point, but I'm not going to worry about that today. Next is, I'll just jump to the barrel. And again, this paste is gone on, melted on and dried now, or mostly dried now, and that's really what's creating the protection. Well, it is creating the protection layer for the majority of the metal pieces of the firearm. And you don't have to paint on a lot. Like you saw me, I may have gobbed on a little bit more than I absolutely had to, but it just means that you might have to wait longer for it to dry out as much as you might like it to before you wipe it off. But nonetheless, you can feel pretty confident that we got a pretty good layer on here. And you can see, of course, the barrel I showed you earlier, it is clean, and equally as important is the feed ramp here. Gotten it really clean here. And need to get back into this groove as well. Okay, I think we can call that done. All right, last but certainly not least, the slide. And just kind of talking as we do this, because we're almost wrapped up here. Next will be putting some lubrication in the hot spots where we got metal on metal rubbing and a few others I like to do in the mix. Speaking of the heat gun, if you're going to use that, probably best to stay away from your red dot if you have one. You know, I know they have some plastic on them, like here are the buttons, for example, and a battery compartment on the Holosuns. A lot of them are here on the side, not on the bottom, which is kind of nice. But don't want to spend a lot of time on that, at least I don't. Everything else is fair game to get coated up with that stuff. And look, you'd have to be coating everything with a regular liquid CLP or oil or grease like rig. Either way, just since I've been using the stuff that I won't talk about anymore, it's just what I've gotten used to, and I like the way it protects or seems to protect. And there I go hitting the camera again. And look, if you don't get it all wiped off, it's not bad. You're not going to leave on so much. It's running everywhere, caked on, so you don't have to worry about that. You can always wipe it off later if you find it a little greasier than you like or causing you issues. I don't know what those issues would be. You can always wipe it off. And yes, I tend to go overboard when I'm cleaning sometimes, at least when it comes to wiping excess stuff off like we're doing here. You got some nooks and crannies, again, on the outside, in between the rear sight posts. Here on the back of the red dot, which I didn't mind getting on because that's metal. The housing on this particular red dot is titanium, so you're going to be hard-pressed to hurt it. I think titanium doesn't like salt, if I remember right. We're not introducing any salt or sodium here so far as I know. So no need to worry about titanium necessarily. Again, I just don't want to spend a lot of time around it with the heat gun. With the lenses and the solar panel in this case, you never know. There's no reason to. You can always wipe some plain CLP on it later. I did actually do that on the sides. So I know titanium doesn't corrode anyway for those that are going to point that out to me, but I did it anyway because it makes it look clean and shiny, which you can see. You know, part of the cleaning of the firearm is to restore its looks again, and I do love the looks of a, oh gosh, I really hit it hard that time. I really do love the looks of a clean firearm. All right, done that enough. Get in here and knock out this inside piece a bit. And you know, the nice thing about the paste, even though you're trying to wipe off what's mostly dried up now to leave that final protective coat, if you don't get it all off, it just is like leaving a little bit of extra lubrication behind. You're not hurting anything. Now again, you don't want to over lubricate your parts, obviously. We talked about that. But look, it doesn't have to be perfect. The goal is to wipe most of the stuff that's dried up, any caked up areas, even though this stuff doesn't really cake up per se. May not be the best word to use, but hopefully you know what I'm saying. And I think this is just about got it. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about lubrication. In your user's manual, it's going to likely point out the recommended areas to that you need to get some lubrication on. And again, you don't want to over lubricate. You don't want to use too much oil. You don't want to use too much anything gooed up, because when that combines with the sludge that gets in here, it really is going to create sludge for you and can hamper performance and cause some malfunctions even. So we mentioned that, but just to reiterate, so we're not looking to cake it on. Some folks think that it should have a dry look once you get the lube on. I'm not so much a stickler for that. I don't mind it being a little bit wet. It makes me feel better to see that it's wet, because that tells me that I did get lubrication on the right spot. So it's kind of a visual thing, but then I know if it happens to be too much, you can dab it off a little bit, wipe it off completely and start over, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm just saying that I'm not a stickler for it. It's got to be so little that you almost can't tell anything is on there. And so again, the user manual is going to highlight, but I'm going to tell you that if you get things in the right light, you can see wear points. And while this is not painted or coated in nitride or whatever else, bare metal for the most part, you can still see, hopefully, some wear on the edges here, as you might, because that's what operates inside the grooves, inside the slide here. And so we can expect some wear on these guides, both at the front set and the rear. Right on the tail of these rear, there's some. And then I probably want to get just a teeny bit there on that spring. I'm not too terribly worried about it, but I'll probably put a dab there. And I'll probably put a dab right here on this piece, and maybe across the top of that, but not looking to put a lot on that at all. And the only reason why I want to put some here is because that is clearly a point of wear. I can see a little bit there with the light reflecting. So that's what I'm doing, is kind of looking for the bits of exposed metal. This VP9 seems to be wearing, if nothing else, really evenly. there's not a lot of paint that has been scalped off, and what has come off is done evenly in the space that is being worn. There's some stuff that I left behind. Don't like that. I got it? Yep. That's the thing, as you look, you may find places you missed. That's okay. As long as the gun's apart, it's easy enough to wipe it down again. Got nothing but time, right? So yeah. So with that, we're going to take some liquid frog lube. I like to dip my fingers in it and touch on these points. Again, we're not looking to soak. We're just looking to get some on there. I'm not doing a whole lot. Is that even a term? Whole lot? I use that a lot, actually. What I'll do is I'll take some and I'll scrape it off on these ledges inside the slide. Like I said, those are the contact points with the slide guides, if you will, on the frame. And then what I like to do is get a little bit here, just a little bit. And then one of my favorite places is where you can see that right there. That's where, as the slide comes back over the top of the barrel, it makes contact there. It seems to do that pretty much on most semi-automatics. And so what I'll do is I'll take a little lube and put it there. It's not going to hurt anything. And you can wipe the excess off later when you're ready. All right, so that just about does it. So what we're going to do is get the barrel back in. I'm probably going to put a little bit here on the barrel up front where that touches down in here. This piece here is what goes up against that, so I'm going to put some there. I like to put some, you can see the rings start to form over time, wear points. So I will grease up the barrel a little bit. This is probably the least amount of lubrication I put on. It just makes me feel better to have it there. And I can wipe off any excess I need to. So I'm going to feed the barrel back in exactly opposite of the way I took it out. So letting it go in at an angle and then just dropping it in place. And you can tell it kind of just is loose in there. Then I'm going to take this guide rod, this end facing forward. And again, it's reverse. So I'm going to put it up there first. And then, I always forget this, there's a little crescent notch right there. And so what I'm looking to do is get the rear plate of the guy rod lined up with that. So I'm going to line up the front hole. I've got to push the spring forward ever so slightly to get it forward of this piece on the barrel. And then I'm just looking for it to go down in that notch, and it looks like it has. When you get it right, you'll see the guide rod and spring are usually pretty much flat across there. If it were cockeyed one way or the other, you'd probably want to redo it, but it looks like we're good there. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I want to make sure my disassembly lever is down in roughly the 6 o'clock position. It has to be in order to get the slide back on, and then all I'm doing is lining up the guides in the frame with these notches in the back of the slide. I'm putting it on there as flat as I can, as you can see, hopefully. And then I'm just simply pulling it back across those guides in the frame. And then I'm going to pull the slide all the way back and lock the slide in the rearmost position long enough for me to get the lever back up, and you're swinging it now counterclockwise until it's pointing to the rear of the firearm, or basically 3 o'clock. With the slide lock release, we can see the slide is on. It didn't shoot off the end, which is always a good sign. And now we're going to rack it just a few times to see if it feels and looks and sounds about right. Make sure you can lock it back. You can. And now what we want to do, of course, it's not loaded. Now what we want to do is pull the trigger and make sure the trigger seems to be working. Now you won't know 100% until you get to the range and fire it again. But most of the time, unless you get something really wrong, and you're probably going to have the failure getting it back together, or getting the slide back on, and that, or one of the switches didn't get moved back before you put the slide back on, those sorts of things, you're probably going to cause an issue with the firing pin just getting it back together. So once you get it back together and you're able to rack the slide, there's a good chance the trigger is going to be just fine, and you can test that a few times to be sure. I am confident that the trigger is just fine and the gun will fire. Again, I'll know the next time I shoot it, which will be here in the next week or two at the absolute most. I typically go bi-weekly, sometimes every week. But that's it. That is a cleaned HK VP9. We appreciate you watching. If you've liked what you've seen, be sure to like our video here. We'd greatly appreciate it. If you haven't yet, take a moment to subscribe to our channels. It'll let you know when we put out new videos. We're still kind of new to this whole YouTube thing, but hopefully we'll get it ironed out, smoothed out. Let us know if we've missed something or done something you didn't understand. We're happy to talk to our followers in the comments. If you have a question or concern, or just tell us we fouled up something, it's already happened in a couple of other videos. I don't have a problem with that. We don't have a problem with that. Dennis is the same way. Let us know. If you want to see something that we haven't shown, point it out. Tell us. We'll do our best to make that happen. But we appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe. And thanks for watching again. We'll see you soon.